Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is cybersecurity is still a shared responsibility. So the company that I work for, Axis Communications, we predominantly work within the physical security market. And the people and stakeholders that we work with are physical security professionals. However, as we know, the trend between cyber and physical is merging a lot, and so it should be. So yeah, we'll be having a look at who the stakeholders are within cybersecurity. We'll look at the implications of an attack and why supply chain due diligence is so important to mitigate the risk. So who are the stakeholders in cybersecurity in relation to physical security professionals? So when we've gone out to market, these are generally the answers we hear back. The manufacturer who are producing the devices, they're building in your cybersecurity features and how to recommend network security best practices. We've got your integrator that is installing the equipment. And then, of course, we've got the end user who is using this equipment on a daily basis. And of course, they're all important. But if we look at the bigger picture, I believe there's a lot more than just those three. If we look at most projects, it starts at the beginning in the design phase. And most of the time, a consultant is employed. Potentially in the past, a physical security consultant may not have valued so much of cybersecurity when we were looking at analog devices. But these days, network video cameras and associated devices, they're sitting on our networks. So there should be some form of cybersecurity guidance within those specifications. If we move on to the next one, we have distributor. So most of the equipment within a physical security market is procured through a distribution model. It's fairly well known that it's easier to attack equipment whilst it's in transit than whilst it's at the origin of the manufacturer. So a distributor has to be responsible for how they're securing this equipment when it's on their premises. Then naturally, we also have government who are setting out legislation, GDPR, the NIS2 directive. We've got the bad guys, the cybercriminals, who are trying to attack these systems and share the vulnerabilities around their network to essentially amplify the attack to cause the maximum amount of chaos they can. Then we have the consumer. Those people within the organization who are using this equipment on a daily basis. Everybody within an organization needs to be aware of what they're doing on a company's network, on a company's laptop, and the consequences that can arise if they are not following cybersecurity best practices. So when we've also gone out to market over the years, these are kind of some of the questions and comments that we've had back from physical security professionals. And thankfully, it is changing. That kind of merge between the two is improving. But yeah, we've had comments such as, well, that's an IT issue. That doesn't really matter. The IT will sort that. I don't think that's an excuse anymore. I've had this one personally said to me. This was in relation to a large national retailer who was deploying video surveillance technology across their retail stores that they kind of knew had vulnerabilities. And they said, well, who cares if someone can watch the footage? Can you imagine if that come out in the newspaper? Yeah, I don't think it would be too great for that certain retailer. We've also seen comments such as, we're not big enough to be a target. Perhaps a small installer may not be that big, but the companies and organizations they're working with, they have access to their buildings, their networks. That can't be an excuse. And potentially, the one that kind of encompasses all of these questions and comments is, well, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been all right up until now, been a physical security manager for my whole career, and I've not had any problems so far. And of course, there are some very experienced people within our industry that are upskilling. And that is the important thing. We always have to upskill and remain competent on the latest technologies. Has it changed? Okay. So if we look at the potential implications of an attack, naturally we have the business risk associated with a cyber attack, operational downtime, the period in which a business can't operate, the loss of intellectual property, stealing ideas. You can lose your competitive advantage within the marketplace. Of course, reputational damage is pretty well known. If a hack or data breach takes place, there is a high chance that organization can lose a lot of customers. Adversely impact share price. We've seen it sink company share prices following a data breach. Then, of course, I mentioned the government legislations. There are large fines in place from both the GDPR and the NIS directive. And potentially one which is often overlooked is overriding physical security systems. If your physical security systems can be accessed and somebody can gain access to your property, you've then got a physical threat to your people on your site and the physical assets contained within your property. So if we look at some examples of video surveillance systems being hacked, so a fairly recent one, we've all seen the horrible war which is going on between Ukraine and Russia. So Russian attackers have actually been attacking the video surveillance systems of local corner shops and coffee shops to get precise, exact locations and able to advance their attack. Do you think them coffee shops and corner shops thought they were big enough to be a target? Probably not. Another one which, yeah, I suppose it makes quite a nice headline, but wasn't very nice for this casino, was an Australian casino that they managed to hack the video surveillance system, and somebody was relaying exactly what was going on the gaming floor to a partner who was playing those certain games in the casino, and wasn't until the following morning that they'd lost $32 million. Yeah, I suppose on that rare occasion, the casino lost out. So what actually makes a credible vendor? We've got your business policies and processes, the features of a product, the cybersecurity features that are built into that product, how the device is managed throughout its life cycle. What's secure on day one may not be secure tomorrow. So some business policies and processes that we can look at. Of course, we've got ISO 27001. We've got government-backed schemes such as Cyber Essentials Plus, and we have building security in maturity model. But what's important to recognize with these is they are essentially looking at how organizations protect themselves. And the reason that's important, because I would argue if somebody can't emphasize how they can protect themselves, how do we expect them to protect their customers? So if we look at product-related cybersecurity features, first of all, before we look at the features, I think we should acknowledge where the equipment is being made. So within our industry, it's fairly common to see OEM technologies. There's two large Chinese organizations that manufacture for reported, I think it's 90 other manufacturers. It's a fairly common theme that hackers will like to attack OEM technologies because if they can get into one, there's a good chance that they can amplify that attack. We also need to look at the processor chips because that is fundamental to how a technology behaves. Do your due diligence with the manufacturers that you're working with. Ask them what processor chips they're using if it isn't transparent on the data sheets. Then we've got some more advanced cybersecurity features such as signed firmware, secure boot, and TPM. And we also have manufacturer hardening guides. I would question if a manufacturer can't provide a manufacturer hardening guide, do they really understand the risk if an installer installs the equipment incorrectly? And like I say, what's installed on day one is not always going to be secure. So we need to manage those vulnerabilities throughout. We need to see if a manufacturer potentially has security advisory notifications. How are they managing those vulnerabilities? Does a manufacturer support device management inventories? Can you see what is installed throughout your estate and the firmware statuses and what applications are installed on those technologies? And then, of course, we've got your service and maintenance. So within our industry, most of that is usually procured through an FM provider. What does an FM provider often look for? The lowest cost. And that usually ends up with your maintenance provider doing the bare minimum. And the bare minimum for a video surveillance system being maintained is, let's give the cameras a quick wipe, let's check that everything kind of looks all right. But what about software maintenance? Is the firmware being updated? I would argue that that's more important than the hardware maintenance. All software needs maintenance. We can have feature and functionality additions, but the biggest thing is the way that we can minimize the risk by patching firmware. When we've looked into the research, the ICO published a report that 60% of data breaches were actually related to available patches. So potentially some of these could have been minimized if people were being conscious of the firmware and software that's installed on their technologies. Also, within the video surveillance industry, it's quite common that people will make comparisons between the warranties of devices. Some might offer a 2-year warranty, some may 3. The more premium manufacturers might offer a 5-year warranty, but that's around the hardware of the technology. We also need to be looking at how long is that software supported. Again, I would argue that software maintenance is just as important as that hardware warranty. So a recap, we've acknowledged there are multiple different stakeholders in cybersecurity. We cannot just pass the blame on to another department, to another stakeholder. There are some big implications if an attack does take place. So we need to acknowledge that risk and do our very best to ensure that we're doing what we can to mitigate the risk. And supply chain due diligence. We must evaluate our supply chain and how they can support us, being partners in cybersecurity. So, yeah, thank you very much. Cybersecurity is important. Hopefully going forwards, we won't have to keep educating the physical security market and it becomes the norm for that merge to be a natural thing. Thank you very much.